All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're live here at Cliff Lede Vineyards. Welcome to Cliff Lede Live on YouTube. We're excited today to talk about the 2005 year, summer, the vintage. In a few moments, I'll have my dad join and we'll ask him some questions about that year and his thoughts and all of these amazing things that happened. But before we do that, just a couple quick notes for all of our wine club members and mailing list members out there. I think it's tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to receive a special offer from us, and it's really something you're going to want to take advantage of. You'll see it in your email inbox, and you'll need to go in to our new online shop experience. We've been working on updating improving the shopping experience online, and you may need to reset your password. But again, there's going to be a really special offer there for you on some wines and some things that, well, you'll have to wait and see what that looks like. But also wanted to just quickly mention that our poetry dinner is coming up on August 16th. That's kind of the pinnacle event we do every year, where we feature the new vintage of poetry and the new vintage of Marla Blanc, of course. And the food's amazing, the atmosphere is amazing, and there's only about 10 spots left. So if you're thinking of coming out for that, take a look. Otherwise, come and see us when you can. We're doing great. It's been a great year so far. 2025 vintage is looking strong. The weather's been great. You can see the reflection of the hillside. I mean, it's beautiful, sunny, blue skies. And in behind me is the tank room, where we've been actively working on bottling all of our 2023 reds and 2024 whites, and everything's tasting amazing. But we won't be talking about those wines for probably another 6 months to a year. So we've got some time before that. But truly, tonight's episode is about throwing it back to 2005. It was a pretty big year for us here at Cliff Lede Vineyards. It was my first summer out here in Napa. I came out with my sister for, 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. And we did odd jobs around the winery. And well, I always look back at those moments very fondly. But instead of just having me talk about my experience, I thought it'd be really fun tonight to have my dad join, because he's not always on these webinars. And well, he was one of the guys, of course, that was here and very busy at that time. So please welcome my dad, Cliff, to the program. How's it going, Dad? Good. Make sure you're in the frame there. Okay, looks good. Yeah, just so you can get a little closer. It's okay. That's great. So welcome.
Yeah,
having a good day.
Every day's a good day,
right? Exactly. Well, it's great to have you on. And folks that are watching, if you want to throw questions in the chat, please do. I see Carol's signing in from St. Louis. Nice to see you, Carol. Drinking an 09. Awesome. Sure, that's drinking great. We're going to taste an 05 in a moment, and we'll talk about that. But, Dad, it's great to have you on the program. And I think it'd be fun to kind of step back 20 years and talk about some of these stories and things that were going on in 05. I remember coming out here my first time in Napa, first time seeing, this beautiful place, and coming to the winery, and there's just construction everywhere. There's trucks everywhere. The roads are ripped up, and the hillside is, torn up, and you're putting this building together. So what was that like for you? What was that year like? I mean, you had a lot going on. I mean, you connected with a lot of great people we'll talk about, but when you think back to 2005, I mean, how did that feel to you?
Well, it was a lot of fun. I mean, as a lot of people know, I came out of the construction business, so it was a project, and I love projects. And the goal was for us to get ready for crush, for harvest of 2005. And we were very fortunate that we built it ourselves, because I think we built it literally in 12 months, and it's a pretty substantial building. And we had a great architect, Howard Backen, who, rest in peace, Howard, who just did an amazing job. I remember when I first sat down and talked to him in 2003, I said, my dream is I want the winery over on that hillside. And I took him out, and we looked at the hill, and I said, I want to tuck it into the hill. I want to get some trees out front. I said, I want to have a presence, but I don't want it to be in everybody's face. And I think he did a remarkable job.
Yeah,
he really did.
So you wanted in the hill. Were there other things that you kind of really wanted to have? Had you been to other wineries that kind of inspired, the design? Or?
Well, in 2004, we hired a guy named David Abreu, and he was and still is known to be one of the best viticulturists in the valley, but he also knew a lot about wineries. So David, myself, and our winemaker at the time, we went over to Bordeaux and we toured a bunch of Bordeaux houses. And I remember we went into Chateau Latour and they had these concave tanks.
Oh,
conical tanks.
Yeah, the tanks that like we had.
And yeah, we plagiarized. We didn't buy them from France. We had an American tank builder build them. And,
well, there you go.
But we got that idea and, several other things. But it was a fun trip. And I always thought, well, if they're good enough for Chateau Latour, they should be good enough for us.
So he's speaking to the tanks that are directly below us here in the tank room that have this conical sort of tapered shape, which are great for gentle extractions and making the wines here, but certainly something that you notice when you visit, when you come to the winery. So some great inspiration from Bordeaux, and I mean, I'm sure it would have been a big undertaking, and getting that done in 12 months. I didn't realize it was only 12 months.
Yeah.
But I do remember the 05 harvest. I think I came back to visit you in like October, and I mean, none of this glass was here. I don't even think the catwalk was finished. There was still a lot of work being done, but you brought up a name that is also kind of very central to the foundation of our winery, and that's David Abreu. And stepping back, you said you met him in 04. I mean, how did you meet him? Like, how did you come across a guy like that?
Well, a lot of people, looked David up, and he was instrumental in helping people find vineyards, and obviously I did it a different way, but I was actually at a barbecue, and I was new to the valley. I didn't know very many people, so I was kind of standing around and, just chatting to whoever. And I looked over, and there was this huge barbecue, and there was this guy, and he was doing chicken. And the barbecue was very hot. The chicken, it was smoke everywhere, and I thought, that poor bastard, he's over there, and he's cooking all this, and nobody's going near him to talk to him. And I thought, I'll go over and talk to this guy. So I went over and introduced myself, and he said, "Hi, I'm David Abreu." And I thought, well, there you go. It was fortuitous that he was the guy barbecuing. We actually got along pretty good. And I remember saying to him, I hear you're pretty good in, the vineyards, and would you like to come take a look? And it was literally I think the barbecue was on a Thursday, and that Saturday we got together. That morning we drove around for about 4 or 5 hours. Looked at all our vineyards. At that time, we had a vineyard up on Mount Veeder, which we don't have anymore.
Yeah, I remember that.
So we went and looked at them all. And then he came on board about, I don't know, after the season. He started in,
2005-ish. Yeah. And then, I mean, after that started, designing the replants and working with you on, I guess, designing the vineyard. You walk around our vineyard and you still see some of the Madrona clones that he picked out from his Madrona Ranch vineyard, which is unique for Stag's Leap District, by the way. I think we're the only winery that has ever connected with him out in this appellation. But I love that story. You're at a barbecue and you just walk up and there's like this iconic guy, and you never knew him before that. That's pretty neat.
He's a pretty down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
You could, once you get to know him, you could definitely see him over there grilling everything.
Yeah. Well, I know they do a lot of barbecues out here, and it always looks great.
And it was great. We brought him on, and the first thing he says, "Well, we should rip everything out and replant it right from the start." And I said, "Well,
wow.
It'd be nice to leave a little bit."
Yeah.
As you know, we ripped that whole hillside out. The whole Poetry Vineyard came out.
I think there's only 3 blocks left.
That
2
one
down
by
here
the
and 1 on
farmhouse,
Poetry. That are from the mid 90s. But that's exciting. So I mean, I guess the other big piece of the team at that time was Michel Rolland, world famous consulting winemaker, consults for all the big Bordeaux houses and travels the world. And I didn't even know how this guy does what he does, but he's kind of the wine whisperer when it comes to blending and putting things together. So I'm curious, how did you get connected to him?
Well, that was through David. David worked with Michel on a lot of his other projects, and we had a pretty young winemaker at the time, and he suggested that maybe you want to meet this guy and bring him on board. And I obviously I'd read a lot about Michel Rolland and I was aware of him, and so that was interesting working with Michel. We worked with him for I don't know, 6-7 vintages probably.
Yeah,
I think
like that.
till about 2012 maybe. somewhere in there.
Yeah, well, Chris joined in 12, and I think we had Philippe Melka for a couple years, so it might have been
5
he might have
years,
went through
yeah.
9 or 10. Well, hey, we're talking a lot about wine, and I'm getting thirsty, so let's pull something out. I've got the 2005 Cliff Lede Stag's Leap District Cab, and the reason I pulled this bottle is we've got like, I don't know, 10 or 15 cases of this, if that. I have to check. It's not a lot remaining available for sale, and so we're basically reopening the library. We're going to do a small offering of this. Again, you'll see that in your email that you get tomorrow, along with a special offering on top of that. So if you were ever interested in grabbing some of this wine, this is the last opportunity. We've got 750 ml bottles, and we also have some large formats, but that will truly be the last time that this wine is available to get, unless you find it somewhere else or someone's got it in their cellar. But the 2005 Stag's Leap District Cabernet. So this wine, coming from our property here in Stag's Leap District, 5% Cabernet Sauvignon, there's 13% Merlot, and then just 1% Malbec, 1% Petit Verdot, 14.8% alcohol, and 5,800 cases. So not a small production for an early vintage of this wine.
Well, we built this big winery. We had to fill the tanks with something. So.
Absolutely, I see it. You can see the color is just starting to throw a little bit of that like garnet. I mean, a little, the ruby is starting to throw a little to the garnet edge. I can tell you the nose just smells amazing. I mean, the fruit is definitely evolved. You're getting some nice tertiary umami notes. I guess we should have had a winemaker join to give us all the, the full rundown. But to me, this wine just smells very complete, very composed. You still get that like trademark Stag's Leap District cocoa powder quality, but incredibly young. It's a 20-year-old wine. I mean, I remember talking about, some of these wines in like 2010 and 2012, or even in like 2007, you have some of these older vintages. It was like, what's it going to be like when we can go back and taste 20-year-old Cliff Lede wines? Like it's pretty crazy to think that we're at that point now.
I think it's going to be interesting when you can taste 50-year-old wines. And more than likely, I may or may not be here, but you guys will be able to enjoy that. Because as you know, I like old wines.
Yes. So. Big fan of old wines, and the reason why we will have those wines, because you've always been very pro library, like keeping a library of the wines and keeping wines for decades, for generations, so that the next generation can enjoy these wines. And I think you told me once that you learned that from John Schaefer. Was he one of the first guys you connected with out here too?
Yeah, I think the start though was the trip with Abreu game. We also went to Chateau Mouton Rothschild, and they took us down into their cellar. And I remember seeing like vintage, wines from the early 1900s, and they had literally like 1 or 2 dusty bottles. And I thought, okay, this obviously back in those days, they probably everything they made, they almost sold it all because they wanted.
They need money. Yeah,
money. But yes, I talked to John Schaefer one day, and I said, John, how many cases do you put away in library? And he gave me a rough number. And I thought, boy, that seems like a lot. But I guess there can never be enough of, especially in great vintages, you want to put a lot of wine away. Because as Jason said, I like wines that are a little more aged, and it's nice to be able to re-release some of these and offer them so people can actually see how the wine's evolved over 20 years.
It's actually been really great to watch the reception of library wines. It feels like every time we do a library offering, they go very quickly. I mean, because you've always, I guess, from the beginning, your approach with Abreu in the Vineyard and working with Michel Rolland, and I guess just even your background of, being a Bordeaux collector. I mean, you've always the wines have always been made to age, right? And be able to stand the test of time. And I can tell you, like, this wine on the palate still has beautiful structure. There's still some nice tannin. I mean, this is like just begging for a beautiful piece of steak or something. But you could also just kind of have this with something simple like some cheeses and just really make it about the wine. It's really nice. I opened this about 30 minutes ago, and just straight out of the gate, it's ready to rock. It's delicious. I would even think, another 5 or 10 years on that would be interesting to watch where it goes. But what else can we say? 05 was a good vintage, right? I mean, I think it was a higher yielding vintage, but otherwise, cool start to the season and then warm, dry summer. This has 70% new French oak on it, so still working with French oak, of course, and yeah, one of the first wines made in the new facility using gravity flow and all the techniques that we still use. We think this building's 20 years old, and then to actually be in here and look around, I mean, it's crazy to think that it's 20 years old. It still feels state of the art, and I know that the current team still really appreciates what you did, and we actually had some winemakers here from a winery up in Oakville yesterday, and they hadn't visited production before, and they were walking around and just like, oh my gosh, there's like so much space, and it's like this was done so perfectly, and the cave is laid out so nicely. So you guys did a great job, and you get a lot of envy from our neighbors. But there's another kind of fun thing I wanted to ask you about from back in those early days. 2005 was the first year we did the Rock Block Series wine. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if you could tell the story of the Rock Blocks and how that came to be, because obviously that's never really been done before, at least as far as I know. And a lot of the times when you think about the quintessential wine experience, you're imagining, white tablecloths and just kind of the pomp that comes around with wine. But I felt like when you came into the Valley, you wanted to do things differently. So,
well, yeah, I think, I've been to the Valley, I don't know, three or four times in the late 90s, and then, multiple times when I was looking for a property to purchase. And so I visited a lot of wineries, and, 99% of them were playing classical rock or classical music or opera or just the sort of tried and true music mm-hmm. that you hear at a winery. Mm-hmm. And I always thought to myself, well, if I own a winery one day, we're going to play classic rock because that's my favorite music. Uh-huh. And if people don't like it, well, there's lots of other alternatives. Sure. But so we started out playing classic rock, but that wasn't the driving force, behind the Rock Blocks. Mm. It was more at that time to educate myself. I sat at the blending table with, the winemakers and Michelle Roland and the team, and David Abreu was at the blending table. And I remember, they'd be talking about, 7 East and, 14 West and all that. And I'd have to look on my piece of paper. And I remember learning that names are much easier to remember than numbers. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I need to name these blocks. And I thought, well, I only have 2 children, so that's not going to work. And because of the classic rock thing, I said, well, what about classic rock? What about if we have all the people that work at the winery that want to participate, give us their 10 most favorite classic rock songs. Okay. And then, like some other people, I played dictator, and I basically decided that, these were the best, right, the best names.
Put the selection together.
Yeah. And it's a fun thing because you always get people like criticizing, well, how could you do that and not have that?
Yeah. How do you not have
why did you pick that song? And I'd say, well, think about it. I think AC/DC is a great one. It's like, can you put highway on a label? I guess you could, but you sure as heck don't put hell on a label. Right. So maybe you didn't pick highway to hell. Yeah. So yeah. Like try to find a great REM song that works on a label. It's not that easy. Religion is not one we want to use. Losing obviously is not another. Right. Another one. So yeah. But it was it was something I did just for me, and then we decided we'd do the Rock Block series. Yep. And it's gone 20 years now, I think. Eh?
Yeah. I mean, this 2025, will be the 20th year of the Rock Block series. So I guess I'm curious, like, how does it feel now that like you've seen it grow beyond just the map, and it's kind of become part of the personality of the brand? I mean, that must make you feel proud and excited about what we're doing.
I think we've accomplished a lot. I never in my wildest dreams thought that you would be sitting beside me. I didn't do this venture thinking that, my kids were in Canada at the time. Like Jason says, they were, I don't know,
I was 19,
whatever.
In 05.
But when I bought the winery, you were 16. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the intent was never that this was something built for the family, but both you and your sister are down here now. Marla
Mhm.
works on the other side of the business.
Mhm.
But yeah, to see the success, to know that, the accomplishment of a 100-point score for me from Robert Parker was probably one of the pinnacles. They always say, what would pass before your eyes when you
right.
die? And that first 100-point, and because I'd met Robert, he tasted our wines, at the winery. He came in, and I'd always studied him because I bought a lot of Bordeaux, and I never went over and tasted out of barrel, so I trusted Robert Parker's palate. And so that was kind of a big thrill. So we've come a long ways, put it that way, in 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that would have been a cool experience to have too, sitting with Robert Parker and tasting wine. I mean, I just wonder, like, his methods, how quick he is, or what questions he would ask. It would be interesting to be a fly on the wall when that happens. But I remember that morning too, that when we first got that 100-point score, that was pretty special. And I think you're right. I think it's pretty amazing that we've got this family property now. Back in 2005, I was a 19-year-old kid. I was out here thinking, it's California. There's going to be beaches. There's going to be girls. It's going to be awesome. And then I got to Napa Valley, and I was like, yeah, this is a little different. But I have to say, shout out to my sister Marla. I think we really bonded that summer because we didn't know anybody, and she's a few years older than me, and we would hang out. We would open some bottles of wine and barbecue and just hang out, and it kind of forced us to become better friends. And how cool is it now that we're all living out here? I don't think at that time 20 years ago we would have thought that was the plan, right? It really wasn't. I was just here to see what California was like, and I think Marla was doing the same thing. So, gosh, those were fun times. The lab we had that was basically in a trailer, and I remember my first job was counting clusters out in the vineyard. I always thought you just kind of were like, go just get rid of them, just send them out to the vineyards. But I have to say that as a Canadian, I didn't know if I really hated it, because I could work on my tan. It was like, oh, okay, nice, I'll be outside.
Never did tell you about rattlesnakes, did we?
Yeah, no. Luckily, the vineyard guys were there to make sure none of that stuff went down. But it's just wild to think back, 20 years and to taste this wine and really to hear those stories. It was an exciting year. A lot happened, and a lot of important people came at that time and kind of set us up on this foundation we have now. And then of course the current team is building off of that. We still have the legacy of David Abreu in the vineyard with a lot of these plantings we have, and the building is still perfectly set up, despite a few modifications we've made and here or there, but it's still kind of perfect for making the wines we make. And I just got to hand it to you for having the vision, to do this, and to be able to taste these wines now is exciting. And 20 years from now, when we're tasting the 2025s, I mean, that's going to be something, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be something.
It truly will. Yeah.
So that was more or less all the stuff we were going to cover today. We talked about the winery and meeting David Abreu and Michelle Roland, and I think you also met Chris through Abreu, right? Chris Tynan, our current winemaker.
He suggested, because at the time, the winemaker we had was moving on to other things.
Yeah.
And David said there's this young guy that was working at another winery, and I guess he wasn't overly happy there. So anyway, I met Chris, interviewed him, and I thought, well, he seems bright. And I always trusted David's judgment, because he obviously had worked with him. Chris, prior to that, was working at Colgan, and he left there because he wanted to become a winemaker as opposed to be the assistant. And I remember Ann Coleman wrote me just an amazing letter of recommendation that I didn't even ask for about Chris. And I thought, well, if he's good enough for Ann Coleman, he's good enough for me. And he's been here now, what, 12 years?
Since 2012. So yeah, that's 13 years.
Yeah,
13 vintages.
Made some amazing wines for us. Very talented man.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I think the early days of these wines, I mean, going back and tasting the fours and the fives and the sixes and the eights and the nines and all those, they're all really exceptional wines. But looking at the 21s and the 23s, which are soon to be released, and like these wines that are now coming from vineyards that are 20 plus years old, and Chris knows this place. I mean, even Travis Bullard, our winemaker, Chris's right hand man. I mean, he's been here over a decade, I think close to 15 years almost, and just the understanding of the vineyard, the maturity of the vineyard, all of that coming together now. I mean, when I say, tasting the 2025 in 20 years, it might be tasting the 2025 in 50 years, if I'm still around. God, who knows? But
AI will make sure you're still
yeah,
around.
AI will figure it out maybe. But, Carol asked, would we taste a 2005 in 2030 or 2035? Absolutely. I mean, we're always going to keep a bit of wine back, especially something like poetry in 2030, 2035 would probably be really, really special. This wine, 2030, I don't see why it wouldn't still be, hanging on, or maybe we could push 2035. I really like where it's at right now. You don't need to wait, but if you forgot about a bottle for a few more years, it probably wouldn't be an issue. Or think about buying one of the large formats like Magnums or 3 liter or something that will have even more capability to cellar even longer. So great question. Let's see, we've got another one. Has the Cabernet Sauvignon Stag's Leap now been replaced with Rhythm? So that's a good question. This wine, the Stag's Leap District Cabernet, we no longer produce this specific wine. What we do make is a Napa Valley Cabernet, and mainly the reason behind that is this wine over the years, getting into the 2017s, the 18s, the 19s, there was more and more sourced fruit going into this bottling. And in 2020, we didn't make any wine. 2021, we started looking at those contracts in the Stag's Leap District, and they were just going to make it very difficult to continue to make a sub $100 Stag's Leap District Cabernet. So we decided to, we're going to work with our own estate vineyards and use those in this bottling. And so the current version, the Napa Valley Cabernet, is, still 60 to 65% Stag's Leap District fruit from our estate. But then the remainder is mostly coming from our vineyard up in Calistoga. So it's more of an estate-driven wine now than it had been in recent years. And so when you think of the Napa Cabernet, the 2021, the 22 that's coming out soon, that's more or less what this wine became. Rhythm is a completely different thing in that Rhythm is a single vineyard sort of best expression from the lower lying slopes of our property. Poetry is the hillside. We've done that since day one. Rhythm is truly just 1,500, 2,000 cases of the best from these lower lying vineyards. Again, this was close to 6,000 cases because we were working with grower fruit. So completely different wines, but still both great and enjoyable. But thank you for that question. Carol, you know how to reach me. If you have more questions, shoot me an email, but I'm going to let my dad go because I told him I'd only take 30 minutes of his time. So I really appreciate you all viewing and checking us out. Again, watch your email for that special offer. When I say it's awesome, it's pretty awesome. So keep an eye out for that. You may need to reset your password and then, take advantage of the sale we're doing and grab some of this 05 before it's gone, because that's the end of it. So thanks again, Dad. Thank you for joining. Appreciate you sharing all the stories. Great to see you. Have a great night, everybody.